The moment they told me to leave, the world I'd known for decades fractured in a way I never dreamed possible. Standing in my own living room, the walls felt colder, painted with the sharp edge of their voices. My son's eyes, once familiar and warm, now carried a chill so cutting it echoed through my very bones. "You're outdated, Harold," he said with contempt that tasted like bile. "A burden. It's time you move on." His wife stood beside him, her gaze sneering, full of the kind of arrogance that had long rooted itself in our home, but had until now been veiled by pretense. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Confusion swirled inside me like a storm, numbing my senses. The man who once depended on my shoulders to carry his dreams had turned into a stranger bearing a verdict of exile. The home we built, every brick laid with sweat and care, now felt alien, poisoned by their cold demand. Their words hung heavy in the air, bitter and unyielding. The silence I offered was thicker than any reply could be. I didn't argue, I didn't plead. My voice, once a steady beacon in our family's chaos, was muted by the weight of this betrayal. Instead, I moved with quiet resolve, the kind forged through years of late nights and endless calculations. Packing a small bag, I didn't glance back at the rooms steeped in memories of laughter and love. Each step away was a severing of roots, yet somewhere beneath the shock, a flicker of something stronger ignited. When the door slammed behind me, the sound felt like a verdict rendered without mercy. The echo of betrayal reverberated in my chest, sharp and relentless. I stepped onto the porch, the autumn wind brushing against my face, cold but clearer than the turmoil inside. The home I had devoted my life to was no longer mine, not in deed, not in spirit. But while the sting of their words sought to pull me under, my mind recoiled from pain toward calculation. Hurt began its slow retreat, replaced by the steady pulse of resolve. The world sharpened around me in that moment. I wasn't just a man cast out. I was a strategist displaced, a retired analyst who had dissected countless financial webs and salad days of doubt. This was an insult not just to me, but to all I had sacrificed. Their arrogance was afire, and I was beginning to see the shape of the war to come. The insult awakened a slumbering intensity, a meticulous calm, and I knew then that this chapter was far from over. Beneath the ache, a plan began to form, silent but unyielding. I walked away from the house without a backward glance, the evening shadows stretching long over the lawn I had once tended with pride. The cold air whispered promises of change, and in that silence I pledged to myself that this betrayal would not be the final word. The man I had been, patient, generous, forgiving, would not vanish into despair. Instead, the man I still was would chart a course through the depths of this wound with the precision of a master planner. The betrayal was raw, a fresh wound carved by the very blood that should have stood by me. But beneath the pain lay the roots of something fierce. In the hollow left by their rejection, I began to hear the quiet heartbeat of strategy, the steady rhythm of justice yet to be claimed. And as the night closed in, I carried with me not resignation, but the cold, unyielding promise of return. The motel room was dim and cramped, a far cry from the home I'd been forced to abandon. But it was a shelter, at least. The hum of the air conditioner and the distant murmur of passing cars created a strange kind of solitude. Quiet enough to let my thoughts unfurl, but loud enough to drown out the immediate sting of betrayal. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I opened my mind to the memories I had kept locked away. The good and the painful intertwined like threads in an old tapestry. I thought about my son's first day of school, how I'd stayed up late nights poring over financial reports at the bank just to send him to the best schools I could afford. I remembered scraping every penny together so he could have a stable future, so he wouldn't have to endure the hardships I faced. Every overtime shift, every weekend job, every sleepless night was a brick in the foundation of our life. And this house, the home we bought together, had been my fortress, the sanctuary where dreams took root, where family gathered and laughter filled the air. I pictured my wife's smile as she planted roses in the garden, a touch of warmth that still lingered in the walls. But those memories were now bitter poison beside the harsh truth. My son was indifferent to the sacrifices made on his behalf. His eyes, once filled with admiration, now reflected entitlement and disdain, not just for me, but for all that I represented. And his wife, who moved through that house with an air of ownership, the sneers cutting deeper than words, was a reminder of how far my own flesh and blood had strayed from respect. They had become parasites, thriving on what I had built and planning how to uproot me without a single thought for loyalty or gratitude. The contrast between the past and present tore at my heart. How had this happened? When did the warmth fade and turn cold? I found myself questioning every interaction, searching for the moment the tide shifted. I clearly recalled the events, the subtle dismissals, the mounting impatience, the lines crossed in countless whispered conversations behind my back. Their entitlement had grown like a cancer, fed by my silence and their unchecked arrogance. I clenched my fists, the memory of their harsh words churning inside me like a storm. It was not just the insult that lodged deep in my soul. It was the betrayal of the bond that should have held us together. I had given everything to nurture and protect them. Had I been so blind to their true nature? The grief was sharp and raw, but beneath it, a simmering fire kindled. This was not merely about reclaiming a house. It was about restoring my dignity, about righting a profound injustice. Time seemed to slow in that cramped room as I sifted through the layers of my emotions, piecing together the tangled web that had ensnared my family and me. I thought about patience, about the countless times I had forgiven, overlooked, shielded them from their own recklessness. But forgiveness had been mistaken for weakness. I realized then that patience was a double-edged sword. It protected, but it could also enable decay. My quiet tolerance had allowed arrogance to flourish unchecked, and that had to end. I recalled my late wife's unwavering strength. She had always spoken of justice not as vengeance, but as balance restored, a truth I clung to now more than ever. I wondered what she would say if she could see this betrayal. Would she urge me toward mercy, or would she stand beside me and demand that I reclaim what had been stolen? The thought gave me clarity and resolve. This was not about punishment, but about setting the scales right so that no one else would suffer the same injustice. With the night growing older, I began to see the path ahead with startling clarity. I was not helpless. My years as a bank analyst had equipped me with skills that transcended spreadsheets and balance sheets. I had an eye for detail, for discrepancies hidden in plain sight. I understood the language of finance and law, the subtle dance of numbers and documents. This knowledge was my weapon, and I would wield it carefully, meticulously, with the patience that years had honed into a silent strength. I started to map the challenges ahead in my mind. I needed to gather evidence, to uncover the truth buried beneath layers of deceit. I would review every transaction, scrutinize accounts, and trace every suspicious movement of money. I would enlist trusted allies, old colleagues who understood the stakes and the craft. No desperation or rage would cloud my judgment. This was a game of chess, each move weighed and measured for maximum impact. As the dawn crept over the horizon, a calm determination settled over me. The boy who had once dreamed of a future built on the sacrifices of a father had become a man I barely recognized, a man who had traded loyalty for greed. But I was no longer that boy's victim. I was a man who had tasted betrayal and was now ready to turn the tide with quiet precision. In the solitude of that shabby motel room, surrounded by the ghosts of memories, I promised myself this:
The story would not end in humiliation. The chapter of betrayal would give way to a new beginning, one written with the ink of strategy, patience, and relentless pursuit of justice. I was ready to reclaim not only my home, but my dignity.
The honor that had been trampled by arrogance. As I closed my eyes, I let the memories settle, no longer as chains, but as fuel for the fire ahead. The road would be long and fraught with obstacles, but I was undeterred. I carried within me the spirit of the man who had built that home, the love that had sustained it, and the wisdom to navigate the storm now raging on the horizon. Justice was not just a distant hope, it was a promise, a mission, a necessary reclamation, and I would see it fulfilled. The first sign that I had underestimated just how deep my son's recklessness went came from a trusted old colleague who still kept his ear to the ground in banking circles. His voice was heavy with concern as he revealed what he'd uncovered. Without my knowledge or consent, my son had taken the liberty to mortgage part of the family's assets, our home included. For a moment, disbelief slammed into me like a thunderclap. How could he be so shameless, so reckless as to gamble away the life I had built for decades? I pictured the papers, the thick mortgage documents, the signatures forged or blindly authorized, silent witnesses to this betrayal. Yet, beyond the raw sting of shock, clarity quickly replaced turmoil. This wasn't a simple blunder. It was a catastrophic gamble with everything I held dear. The house, the sanctuary where my late wife and I had dreamed and raised a family, now stood on the precipice of being lost by debts I never agreed to. I was aghast at the thought that the son I had nurtured, all those years pouring my strength and resources into his future, could now be the source of my displacement. Those documents and contracts, which to some might look like mere bureaucracy, were pieces of a larger puzzle, revealing threads of deceit and neglect. A deep resolve ignited inside me then. This wasn't merely a fight to take back a home. It was a battle to reclaim dignity, respect, and justice. They weren't simply pushing me aside. They were aiming to erase me altogether, to wipe from memory the man who had sacrificed everything. The war was no longer one of bitter words, but of cold strategy. Their battlefield was paperwork, their weapons signatures and forged approvals. I understood these weapons intimately. After all, they were the instruments of my former trade. The decisive moment came during a phone call I wish I could unhear. My son's voice was clipped and merciless. "You're done here, Dad," he said, as if delivering a court sentence. "Stay out of our lives. You have no place." Those words pierced through me, sharp and final. No room for negotiation, no space for understanding. It was not just a rejection, but a declaration. I was to be obliterated from their world, as if I had never been. That night, rage and despair warred fiercely inside me, threatening to swallow what little strength I had left. But the years had taught me mastery over my emotions. Beneath that storm, control emerged strong and clear, like the light that breaks through thick fog. I was not powerless. I was a strategist. Through the pain, my mind sharpened, outlining a path of action with measured steps. This would not be a reckless retaliation driven by anger, but a calculated campaign born from patience and intellect. My first steps were simple yet painstaking. Gather every piece of information I could. I combed through what I already remembered and what others had quietly told me. A bank analyst's eye is trained to spot subtle inconsistencies and irregularities. A mismatched signature here, a suspicious transfer there. Loans approved without proper consultation, expenses disguised as legitimate deductions, forged documents lurking in plain sight. Each anomaly became a thread to pull, a clue to unravel their web of deceit. But information alone was insufficient. I needed allies who understood the nuances of law and finance. Professionals capable of navigating the terrain that my son's greed had so recklessly disrupted. I reached out to an old lawyer friend, a man who had stood with me through countless corporate battles, whose quiet confidence steadied me like an anchor amid the storm. We agreed on a strategy built around precision. No rushed moves, no public confrontations without ammunition. Every dossier would be meticulous, every argument ironclad. My banker colleagues also joined in, lending expertise to decode the labyrinthian pathways of suspicious accounts and questionable loans. Their guidance illuminated patterns I hadn't noticed, revealing layers of mismanagement and fraud hidden beneath bold acts of entitlement. My son and his wife had clearly underestimated the tenacity of those they crossed, overconfident in their ability to obscure the truth. Nights blurred into days as I pored over bank statements, income tax filings, mortgage agreements, and business records. I cross-checked signatures against old papers and photos from the past, recognizing the subtle differences that could mean a forged name or an unauthorized document. I traced money flows that led to obscure shell companies, dead-end accounts, and unexplained withdrawals. Bit by bit, the picture of reckless greed and fraudulent schemes emerged with unequivocal clarity. Meanwhile, I watched from a distance as their bravado showed cracks. In the beginning, they dismissed me as a feeble old man clinging to the past, unworthy of their attention. But panic came quickly. I caught whispers, hurried calls, furtive glances exchanged when they thought no one was watching. Their once confident facade trembled as lenders began asking questions and creditors circled. Their fragility became palpable, a vulnerability I knew to exploit carefully. Every forged signature I uncovered, every reckless debt they amassed, was documented and cataloged, not for vengeance but for justice. The foundations of their scheme were rotten, and my unrelenting patience was the force exposing the rot. This was no longer a personal battle. It had become a professional investigation, a methodical dismantling of lies and falsehoods. The man they once dismissed was no longer a victim or a passive figure. I was a strategist in command, turning every misstep of theirs into leverage. My goal was not retribution, but reclamation, for the home, for the truth, and for my dignity. This fight would require not brute force, but quiet, precise effort. A game of chess where every move counted. Though legal battles loomed ahead and the emotional toll weighed heavy, I found strength in experience. I remembered the long nights balancing risks, calculating portfolios, and foreseeing outcomes. Those skills had not left me. They were the very tools that would dismantle the folly masquerading as ambition. In quiet moments of reflection, I reminded myself of all I had given, the years of hard work, sacrifices unseen, the love poured into family and home. This house was more than bricks and mortar. It was a testament to a life dedicated to those I loved. They might have tried to erase me, but I had not vanished. I was still here, ready to challenge their arrogance with patience and intellect. This was only the beginning of a long battle, but I was no longer a passive bystander. The strategist within had awakened fully, and with every passing day, my resolve hardened. The war for justice had started, and I would see it through to the end. The relentless days that followed morphed the small motel room into the center of a battle I was determined to win. Papers cluttered the table, bank statements, loan agreements, mortgage documents, and an old family ledger. The air hung heavy with the smell of ink and old paper, bearing silent witness to the painstaking work I undertook. Every morning, I woke with a clear purpose: to unravel the web of deceit that my son and daughter-in-law had spun, to locate every misstep and bring it into the light. I began by delving deeply into the family's finances. Line after line, statement after statement, I examined each item with the sharp eye of a man trained to catch irregularities even in vast amounts of data. Unauthorized transfers drew my attention. funds siphoned off without my knowledge, loans secured under false pretenses, and payments that simply did not align with what had been declared. The recklessness was staggering. If they believed their actions would go unnoticed, they had underestimated my experience and resolve. What was most galling was the daughter-in-law's involvement. Her name appeared as co-signer on contracts forged with disturbing skill and intent. Assets moved into the shadows through convoluted transfers to shell companies. Debts hidden under layers of paperwork to confuse and mislead. The recklessness was staggering. If they believed their actions would go unnoticed, they had underestimated my experience and resolve. What was most galling was the daughter-in-law's involvement. Her name appeared as co-signer on contracts forged with disturbing skill and intent. Assets moved into the shadows through convoluted transfers to shell companies. Debts hidden under layers of paperwork to confuse and mislead.
It was clear that this was no haphazard mismanagement. It was a calculated scheme to take control and expel me from the home I had labored over for decades. The realization was bitter, but it steeled my will. No longer alone, I drew strength from my calls to Richard, my trusted lawyer friend. His calm and measured words were a balm to my turbulent mind. "Harold," he said, "we're dealing with fraud that cuts deep. Our approach has to be surgical. Every challenge backed by proof so solid it cannot be denied. We move carefully, methodically, always knowing the next step." These words shaped my approach from that moment on. To validate and deepen our understanding, I enlisted the help of my old colleagues at the bank, men and women who approached the labyrinthine financial world with the same rigor and skepticism that I had honed over decades. They helped decode the maze of transactions, pointing out suspicious patterns and discrepancies I might have missed alone. Together,
The text, we sifted through data that revealed a picture of reckless spending, forged documents, and mounting debts that threatened to collapse under their weight. Day after day, until late into the night, I compiled evidence. Spreadsheets sprawled across the table as I cross-referenced signatures, dates, amounts, tracing funds moving like hidden streams beneath the surface of official records. Piece by piece, the scale of deception emerged, a web as fragile as it was vast. The emotional weight of betrayal pressed down on me, but I pressed onward, finding strength in the clarity that truth provides. With Richard, we charted a clear legal strategy. Begin by challenging every loan and mortgage taken without my consent, underpinned by the forged signatures and falsified documents we had uncovered. We planned to notify creditors and lenders about the fraudulent activity, aiming to freeze the dubious accounts before further damage was done. As a final lever, we would threaten foreclosure, not to punish, but to bring the house back under rightful control before it slipped forever beyond reach. Each document I prepared was scrutinized like a high-stakes balancing act. Accuracy was paramount, timelines had to be flawless, data unimpeachable, arguments airtight. I was no longer just a man wronged. I was a strategist orchestrating a careful campaign, moving my pieces behind the scenes. The house, once threatened by the recklessness of those I called family, would be restored through my quiet diligence. Meanwhile, I closely observed the unraveling of their confidence. When rumors reached my ears of lenders casting doubt on mortgage payments and creditors probing into financial stability, I knew the pressure was mounting. In whispered conversations behind closed doors, I sensed panic rising, a stark contrast to the arrogance that had once permeated their actions. Their facade, fragile and trembling under scrutiny, was beginning to fracture. Despite the unfolding drama, I guarded my emotions fiercely. Their attempts to provoke me through bitter messages or veiled threats were met with calm firmness. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing sting or desperation in my responses. This was a chess game, and I held my moves close to my chest, each one designed to outmaneuver and expose. It was almost ironic how their youthful confidence had blinded them to the strength I harbored. Years of experience, the ability to see patterns in chaos and deception lurking beneath bravado were my greatest assets. I wielded these skills not out of spite, but from a profound desire to reclaim what was mine and to protect the legacy of love and sacrifice the house represented. In quiet moments, reflecting on the years of sacrifices cast aside, I remembered that this fight was about more than property. It was about dignity, honor, and justice, the pillars on which the home was built. They had tried to erase me, but while they had my body at bay, my spirit remained unbroken, fueled by the memories and the battles I was determined to win. The plan was multi-pronged and carefully timed. Prove the debts unauthorized and fraudulent, expose forgeries to creditors, and use the legal threat of foreclosure strategically to wrest control back from those who had overstepped. Each day I inched closer, dismantling their fragile schemes with evidence and unassailable legal arguments. This process was draining, grueling hours, emotional tolls, the constant weight of betrayal. But I found strength in every detail uncovered, in each forged signature challenged. The once unshakable arrogance that had cast me out now crumbled beneath the relentless pressure of truth. And though the road was long and uncertain, I was certain of one thing: victory would be mine, not through anger, but through patience, intellect, and unwavering resolve. The displaced father had become the master strategist. The war was far from over, but with every passing day, the pieces fell into place. The house, my home, would be reclaimed. I would restore not only the bricks and mortar, but the dignity that had been stolen from me. And when that day came, it would not be retribution that fueled my triumph, but justice fulfilled. The day I finally made the first calls to the lenders was a turning point. A moment when the quiet fight I had carried alone erupted into a tangible force. The motel room, dim and sparse, was scattered with documents, the tangible evidence of months of much-needed patience and unrelenting discipline. Each call was carefully constructed, a litany of facts laid bare. I presented forged signatures, unauthorized loans, suspicious transactions, all meticulously detailed and backed by spreadsheets and photocopies. The banking representatives on the other end hesitated, uncertainty seeping into their voices as they acknowledged the gravity of the information. One by one, accounts were frozen, payments halted, and the fragile financial structure my son and daughter-in-law had erected began to crumble under examination. The initial lender's phone call is etched in my mind, a voice balanced between professional caution and the dawning realization of fraud. They spoke of internal investigations and impending freezes, their protocols triggered by the undeniable weight of the evidence I handed over. That call was the first crack in the seemingly impregnable fortress of entitlement and deception they had built. Rumors of the freeze rippled quickly, reaching the ears of those who had once flaunted impunity. The household that once echoed with their brash confidence grew tense and fractured. I could almost hear the echo of panic as their casual overconfidence was replaced by whispered urgencies and secretive conversations. The daughter-in-law's voice, once dripping with scorn, now traced with sharp edges. And my son's responses betrayed a careful and deliberate effort to silence the swelling storm. They confronted me in a public forum, not with the caution of the threatened, but with the venom of the cornered. Accusations poured forth, attempts to paint me as a bitter old man clinging to grievances long past their relevance. But I met each accusation with a composed steadiness, responses carefully measured and prepared in coordination with Richard, my lawyer. The courtroom of public opinion was tense as I spoke of ongoing legal challenges and investigations, facts that unsettled the crowd who watched. Their public bravado cracked in plain sight, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the rush of vindication. With each passing day, creditors grew skeptical. Calls to my son and daughter-in-law became frequent and probing. Their credibility waned under the weight of their own recklessness. Desperation fueled poorly veiled attempts to hide assets or shift ownership within the family.
Such acts appeared less as clever maneuvers and more like frantic flails grasping at straws. Throughout this merciless tightening of the noose, I remained grounded. The emotional toll was heavy. The betrayal of blood never truly fades. Yet it was my patience and strategic mindset, cultivated over decades in the austere halls of banking, that kept me unwavering. Each document I prepared, every legal filing we submitted, was a carefully placed step toward reclaiming not only the house, but the respect and dignity stripped from me. I clung to visions of the home restored to its rightful place, not just as a dwelling, but as a sanctuary for my grandchildren, a place free from the shadows of greed and deceit. The thought was a balm amid the grueling procedural battles, fueling my resolve when fatigue threatened. Foreclosure became a looming but necessary instrument, not wielded vindictively, but as a legal mechanism to wrest control from those who had recklessly endangered our family legacy. It was in this context that the son and daughter-in-law's facade fully crumbled. Their threats lost resolve, their bluster turned hollow. Financial institutions, now fully aligned with the truth and armed with evidence, demanded transparency and accountability, leaving them few options. I became the measured force at the center of this storm, a strategist repurposing every tool learned across years of expertise. My approach was the antithesis of recklessness, disciplined, patient, precise. Slowly, the home threatened by their ambition and attention began leaning back toward stability. I understood the long road ahead, battles in the courtroom, the strain of legal proceedings, the occasional bitter personal encounters. But the tide had unmistakably shifted. The reckless arrogance that had once expelled me was giving way to a tide of truth and consequence. This fight extended beyond mere property. It was a stand for honor, for justice, for a legacy forged with sweat and sacrifice. No wall of arrogance can stand forever against the steady, undeniable pressure of truth. Prepared and resolved, I braced for what was to come. This was my home, my story, my fight, and it was far from finished. But I would not falter. The years had taught me the true meaning of patience and perseverance, and I was ready to see this arduous journey through to its rightful end. The morning of the hearing was a strange mix of calm and tension, a stillness that belied the storm to come. I awoke with a quiet focus, the weight of years settling over me like an old coat, heavy but familiar. Every step that had brought me here, from hushed motel rooms filled with papers and sleepless nights to the slow unraveling of deceit, compelled me forward. The courthouse, with its polished grandeur and formal air, awaited, a stage where justice would finally confront betrayal.
As I entered the building, the murmurs of the crowd seemed to carry the weight of the entire saga, whispers of caution, curiosity, and judgment. Faces both familiar and unknown turned toward me, their eyes reflecting the gravity of what was at stake. My son and daughter-in-law sat across the room, their postures rigid and controlled, yet I could detect an undercurrent of tension beneath the surface. The man who had once been cast aside as outdated and burdensome was now a force, armed with truth and unyielding resolve. The hearing opened with the usual formalities, but the atmosphere was charged. My lawyer stood confidently, presenting weeks of painstakingly gathered evidence with clarity and authority. One by one, documents were handed to the court: the falsified loan agreements, the forged signatures that betrayed trust, the unauthorized debts that threatened the family's home. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the fragile coffin of their claims. Opposing counsel tried to mount a defense, but their arguments frayed under the weight of fact. Expert witnesses took the stand, bank officials who detailed the irregularities in transactions with precision, forensic accountants who traced the convoluted paths of money, legal scholars who affirmed the nature of the forgeries. The courtroom shifted as the truth unfolded like a curtain, exposing the carefully constructed facade. When it was my turn, I stood and spoke softly but with unwavering conviction. I recounted the years of sacrifice that had built the home, the love poured into each brick and beam, and the deep wound caused by betrayal. But my words were not steeped in bitterness. Instead, they carried the measured strength of a man who had endured and endured well. The room listened in respectful silence, as if the power of my testimony transcended mere words. Across the aisle, I saw the faces of my son and daughter-in-law, once so confident,
now marked by the weight of undeniable proof. Their fall from certainty was palpable, their facade crumbling as the judge absorbed the entirety of the case. The judge's voice, when it came, was measured but resolute. The ruling was clear. Restitution was to be made immediately. The debts incurred without authorization were voided. The property, my home, was declared rightfully mine once more. The verdict echoed through the courtroom like a bell tolling justice long delayed. There were no cheers, no spontaneous applause, only the solemn recognition that truth had finally prevailed. Neighbors and observers offered respectful nods, acknowledgments of a battle fought not with spectacle, but with slow, steady determination. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a profound stillness. The house awaited me, not just as a structure of wood and stone, but as the canvas of a life story, now reclaimed. Walking through its corridors, memories washed over me. The laughter of children, quiet evenings shared, the foundation of a family built on love. The victory was not merely legal, it was deeply personal and emotional. Yet, beneath the relief lay the scars of betrayal, wounds not visible but deeply felt. My son and daughter-in-law were no longer just opponents in court, but reminders of fractured bonds and lost trust. Still, I found peace knowing that justice had been served, that arrogance and greed could not extinguish truth. In the following days, the house slowly transformed from a battleground back into a sanctuary. Repairs began, walls were strengthened, not just physically but metaphorically. I worked to restore not only the space but the spirit of family, tentative steps toward healing what had been broken. Reflecting on this journey, I understood that this was not a tale of vengeance but of resilience and justice. I had been cast aside, but I refused to be erased. Through patience, intellect, and unwavering resolve, I took back what was mine, not just a home, but a legacy. The victories were hard won, the scars enduring, but I faced the future fortified by the knowledge that dignity survives even the darkest betrayals. This house, my home, stood as a testament to that truth, an enduring symbol of strength and justice restored. Returning to that house after so long away felt like stepping into a chapter reclaimed from the shadows. The door, which had once been slammed shut in my face, now opened easily, inviting me back into a space laden with memories, pain, and hope. Each step across the familiar wooden floor echoed softly, a rhythm of the past merging with the present. The silence was thick, almost sacred, filled with the laughter of children long ago and the quiet moments shared between family members whose bonds had been tested but not broken. As I moved from room to room, the house revealed its layers. Walls bearing the marks of time and love, faded curtains hanging silently, the worn edges of furniture that held traces of years gone by. It was more than just a structure. It was a vessel holding the weight of sacrifices made, nights spent worrying, and hopes once built upon these very foundations. Yet beneath the comfort lay a subtle ache, an echo of betrayal, a reminder of fractured trust that no court ruling could fully heal. My son and daughter-in-law's absence was palpable. This was no longer a shared home, but a sanctuary reclaimed and guarded. Their departure left a hollow space, a bittersweet testament to choices made and consequences faced. Walking through these rooms, I felt both the sting of loss and the quiet strength of survival. The walls were lined not just with memories, but with the endurance of a man who refused to be erased. The victory in court was a milestone, a restoration of what was legally mine, but the emotional terrain was far more complex.
The wounds of betrayal ran deep, invisible yet ever present. I carried them with a blend of sorrow, understanding, and resolve. Justice had been served, yes, but the journey toward healing had only just begun. Over the following weeks, the house transformed from a battlefield into a home once more. Repairs were made, not just to the physical structure, but to its spirit. Walls were patched and painted, windows cleaned to let in light once obscured by dust and neglect. The garden, once wild and untamed, was tended with careful hands, blossoms beginning to reclaim the earth. But perhaps the greatest restoration was intangible, the slow rebuilding of a sanctuary where dignity and peace could take root again. I channeled my energy into nurturing this revival, both of space and spirit. Outreach to my grandchildren became a gentle priority, sharing stories not only of pain and loss, but of strength, justice, and resilience. I wanted them to understand that even when the foundation shakes, the house can stand if built on truth and perseverance. Reflecting on the journey, I saw it not as a tale of revenge, but of steadfast resilience. I had been cast aside by those I trusted most, but I refused to let that betrayal define my story. With patience, intellect, and unwavering resolve, I reclaimed not only a house, but a legacy, a symbol of endurance against the odds. The scars I bore were a testament to trials survived. They reminded me that dignity, once chipped away by deceit, could be restored through courage and determination. This house, my home, was an enduring symbol, not just of beams and mortar, but of strength, justice, and the unbroken will of a man who would not be forgotten. In the quiet moments, as sunlight streamed softly through the windows, I felt a profound peace settle over me. The past remained a part of me, but so did the promise of renewal. Life would go on, imperfect, complicated, but ultimately mine to shape anew. This was more than a house reclaimed. It was a declaration that no matter how deep the wounds, justice can prevail. That those who betray must one day answer not only in court, but in the quiet reckonings of conscience. And that for those who endure, dignity, respect, and peace await.